Hello again. All right. So today what we're going to be talking about, at least in this lecture, is the Epicureans. We will then go on to talk about the Stoics and the Skeptics, but not in this video. This video is just about the Epicureans, one of our Hellenistic philosophies. Again, after the fall of Alexander the Great and the breaking up of the empire, there was a lot of fighting and warring, and people were very concerned about how to live, and there were a lot of despots and small rulers and other things like that that were going on that were quite terrible. So Aristotle's sort of like level of eudaimonia or happiness wasn't really what people were shooting for anymore. It was kind of a little bit of a lower bar in some respects. But the word that they utilize for all of the Hellenistic philosophies for happiness, or at least what their happiness, was ataraxia, or calmness of soul, tranquility, equanimity, if you want to use a nice $2 word, undisturbedness or untroubledness, or something along those lines. Now, the Epicureans are particularly important because they were one of the most popular out of all the Hellenistic philosophies. They were actually number two, but the early Christians really disliked them a lot, so they destroyed most of their texts. We don't have very much of what remains. In fact, actually, as it turns out, only a few years ago, they just recently finally finished excavating and reconstructing a wall in Turkey, ancient Ionia, that had an inscription on the wall all the way around the city that was Epicurean texts, because the ruler of that city was so engaged and involved in Epicureanism that he had it literally written in stone. So that had been being excavated since I was in college back in the early 2000s, and they were waiting with bated breath to see what was going to come out of that. Nothing particularly new, but again, it's important to have as many authentic sources as we can to look at what was going on at the time. Again, this is roughly from the end of Alexander's empire till the early couple of hundreds CE. So we're looking at the turn of, well, time in the sense of before Common Era and Common Era, or before Christ and then AD after death, or whatever. Again, to be academic in such stuff, we usually go with CE and BCE. Okay, so their progenitor, Epicurus, he is, of course, not exactly Athenian. He's actually from a small island off of the coast of Turkey. His family was very political, and when stuff went bad politically for them, they had to flee to Athens. This will come in later, but political persecution happens fairly often. I mean, in our current political situation, given that it's an election year, you might feel persecuted for your beliefs or who you want to vote for president, either direction. Because if you're in favor of either candidate, the other side is likely to be vehemently against your candidate or disagree with you wholeheartedly. So, and perhaps violently even. I mean, due to protesting, counter-protesting, riots, and vigilantes and such, we've been seeing a rise of that. So once again, happiness. That's what we're shooting for. So Epicurus wrote some letters. These letters we have, and they're mostly what we're going to read from, or what was quoted in your book, or the reading that I had scanned. The other big source that we have for the Epicureans is Lucretius. He was actually from, the 2nd century CE, or roughly 99 CE to 55 CE. We're not sure about his dates. We know that he's not a different Lucretius because he had a different name, sort of. This is like Lucretius the Lesser or something along those lines. He was a poet, and he wrote a very famous poem called De Rerum Natura, on the nature of things, from the Latin. And if you're interested, you can Google this. There's a free open source for it. I believe you can find it at Gutenberg Project, but if not, there's a website for Epicureanism that has this in its entirety. It's an interesting read. It's our most complex Epicurean text that we have. it reads reasonably well, but it's less of a poem than you might think. Notably, also, Epicureans get kind of a bad rap because they are what we refer to as rational hedonists. They believe that pleasure is the good life, and that is what we are. We're animals who seek pleasure and avoid pain, and that all pleasure and pain comes from sensation, much like animals. And that's pretty much the long and short of it. Rational hedonism, however, is the kind where we think about things in the long run, not just short-term, immediate, instant gratification or immediate pleasure or something along those lines. So they get kind of a bad rap for being celebrants or bon vivants or some variety of lush or drunks or foodies. In fact, if you go to epicurus.com right now, that's a website that has recipes to make really good food. They're actually pretty solid when it comes to the recipes for making food too. But Epicureans, if you say you're an Epicurean these days, it usually means that you're a foodie, somebody who really enjoys and likes food, which they did. They took a lot of time to prepare and make their food. However, we'll get into what kind of food and things like that later. But whatever you got, you should take some effort in making it. It's not that it necessarily has to be expensive, nice stuff, but that you have spent time in preparing it and trying to make it the best is that it can be, is something that they did in fact do. And I mean, I don't know, I spent a lot of time in the deep south on the coast of Mississippi and things like that, and there's a lot of we'd call it maybe like pedestrian or poor food that's very good and very well seasoned and well made, and it's from, like, you know, all sorts of trash products that normally people wouldn't normally want, like, you know, ham hocks and you know, sausage from, you know, the leftover bits of things, andouille's pork and beef sausage. It's just delicious. It's really heavily seasoned. You know, a po' boy, if you've ever heard of one of those, is actually short for a poor boy, which is just to say whatever meat and stuff they've got together thrown into a sandwich and pressed and dressed, they say, or something like that. Or like collard greens with, you know, a ham hock or something like that, or red beans, which is just like red beans and rice, and usually some sort of pork fat, either lardons, again, a ham bone, or, you know, bacon, depends. But at any rate, it's cheap, but it's made well. I really enjoy all those sorts of things. Jambalayas and gumbos are also things that come from food that's almost about too rotten to use, and then you throw it all into a pot. So again, not that food that's inexpensive has to be bad. In fact, they try to make it the best that it can be, but that's not that important. Well, what is important is that they do rational hedonism, which is to say you want to get pleasure, but you know, the kind that's going to be lasting. So, like, for instance, having a beer is much shorter amount of pleasure than learning some math. The math will stay with you so long as you practice it and can keep it in memory. The beer will make you happy for maybe an hour or a little bit longer if you continue to drink beers. So again, the issue here is, what do we got for staying power? What do we got for constant stuff? I mean, the reason that you shouldn't rationally drink all the time is because it's bad for your health and you get hangovers and you might make poor decisions. That one also is very important. Making poor decisions is not good, because that'll lead to further anxiety, torment, and bad results from whatever you did while very drunk. I don't know very many people who've ever said, I woke up and I had blacked out drunk. I'm sure I did some great stuff, like really good things while I was blacked out drunk. You didn't do your taxes, at least not well, or, you know, go help the homeless while you were blacked out. No, you did some probably not great things. Maybe even said stuff you didn't want to say. Okay, so on page 200 of your reading, he talks about the pleasant life. So what he says here is this, quote, pleasure is the indented stuff that we've got here. Pleasure is the beginning and the end of the blessed life. We recognize pleasure as the first natural good. Starting from pleasure, we accept or reject, and we return to this as we judge everything good, trusting the feeling of pleasure as our guide. So again, we call this hedonism. The ancient Greek word hedone means something that's pleasant. So they are pleasantists, if you will, okay? So carrying on, they just say, just look at animals. Animals are conducive towards pleasure and move away from pain. I mean, animals are much smarter than us on this on some levels, and they, don't have some of the weird foibles that we have. Like some of us enjoy pain, and also things like, you ever seen a large fire or an explosion or lightning, and you've gone out to watch it or get closer? Animals don't do that. Animals run away from things like that because that's something they deem that could cause pain, and we think that it'll cause pleasure because seeing something of that sort we might consider sublime, and that has its own sort of pleasure to it, but it's weird. So carrying on, he says that through philosophy and science we can be made happy by giving ourselves peace of mind. So on page 201, he says, let no young man delay the study of philosophy. Let no old man become weary of it. For it is never too early nor too late to care for the well-being of the soul. The man who says the season for study has not yet come or is already past is like the man who says it is too early or too late for happiness. So again, that's sort of the point here. And carrying on just a little bit further down, he says, do not think that knowledge about things above the earth, whether treated as part of a philosophical system or by itself, has any other purpose than peace of mind and confidence, and this is true of other studies. So science and philosophy and things like that are supposed to make you feel more confident about the world. Why is that the case? Well, we'll get into that in just a minute, but just remember that philosophy and science are supposed to make you feel better. In fact, the famous essayist or philosopher, I like to call him, Montaigne, who was writing during the Black Plague and other things like that. He was a really nice dude. Everybody loved him. He wrote wonderful essays. One of my favorites on experience. But the essay that I'm referring to right now is called "To Philosophize is to know to die," or something like that. Is to know how to die. What he's saying is that all philosophies are basically there to make you cope with the inevitability or eventuality of death, and that is what philosophy is supposed to do. And all of these Hellenistic philosophies are, in fact, in a certain sense, a way of coping with the possibility of death. It's, in a certain sense, a death cult, much like all of our standard Western religions are. I mean, Christianity and Islam are both death cults as well, in the sense that you're living for your afterlife, right? Also, Buddhism and Hinduism as well. It's a little bit more sketchy when it comes to Judaism, whether or not there's some sort of heaven, hell type thing going on. But at any rate, hell especially. But nonetheless, what we're getting at here is that these things are focused on near death in some respects, or understanding that a little bit better, or dealing with or coping with that. Okay, so we'll talk about science in just a bit. But to get to that, let's talk about Democritus. So he's actually a pre-Socratic philosopher, not an Epicurean. I repeat, not an Epicurean, but he is somebody that the Epicureans bootstrap or take on his scientific philosophy wholeheartedly. So a lot of times people are confused by this, because the Epicureans basically say, Democritus has science right, let's go with this guy. And Democritus is our first materialist. He believes that there is only atoms and void, that he's what we call an atomist. He lived to be roughly 90 years old, we think. The dates on him are real sketchy, as usual for pre-Socratic philosophers. We just don't have good information on them. We don't have anything that they wrote down personally at all, just testimonia. But when we talk about atoms and atomism, we don't mean atoms like the Bohr atom, Niels Bohr atom, or the atom of, I want to say, Johnson or whatever, the first guy who thought he found the atom. Those are actually not the smallest indivisible part, which is what the word atom actually means. It means the smallest indivisible part. Like if we parse matter and parse matter and parse matter, eventually we get, they think, in any sort of form of atomism, to a smallest kernel of existence or being or matter or mass or whatever you want to call it, and that will be called the atom, the one, the singular thing that cannot be broken down any further. But as we know, for our Niels Bohr version of the atom, that's actually made out of neutrons, protons, and electrons. And those are actually made out of quarks. like up, charm, down, spin, stuff like that. And those might have some other things going on with them too. But we currently, in our modern physics system, don't believe that there is probably a smallest part or a smallest thing that would be the literal definition of an atom, i.e. the smallest piece of anything that can't be divided any further. We just think it can probably be infinitely divided or eventually turns into energy or something like that. We've just essentially given up on there being this sort of concept. But it is an interesting scientific concept. It says that there's just material stuff and that it moves through the void, or that which is nothing, like the vacuum of space. And that's basically it. Because if not, then there wouldn't be able to be movement if all of reality was completely filled with stuff. Which, I mean, in a certain sense it is, because the air we're breathing is mostly nitrogen, some oxygen, and some other stuff. So there is actually gas and things and medium between us and the world. Otherwise you couldn't hear me at all. It's like when they say in space no one can hear you scream. It's because there isn't any medium for the sound waves to travel through for it to get to you. So at any rate, they just go ahead and say Democritus is right, materialism is the case. So on that note, also, when you die, you're just dead, and then your atoms disperse and make other stuff. Material is neither created nor destroyed. This is an old belief and still holds true today in modern physics. So that's it. When you die, you just dematerialize into other stuff. You turn into dust and bones and dirt and, maybe trees, and feed maggots and worms and, other stuff like that. And that's all that there is. There are gods, according to the Epicureans, but we'll get to them in a minute. And they are also made of matter and whatnot, but very fine atoms that we can't perceive. And apparently the gods only are perceptible to us in our dreams, which are also apparently some sort of weird material state that we go to when we sleep. That sounds weird, but they're just, again, something very important. Okay, next thing, be unknown or live unknown. This is a very important concept. If we're going to be happy, if we want ataraxia, if we want to be undisturbed, peaceful, have peace of mind, have this calmness of soul, if you're a public figure or famous, then your life will not be calm, tranquil, and have this ataraxia going on. People who have, political aspirations are constantly scheming and trying to get money and get things to get right, to make so that they can get power. And then there are people trying to get them out of power, and people trying to kill them possibly, or people trying to eliminate them as political threats, or sully their good name, or bring to light their bad stuff. Just think about any super famous person. They can't really go into public spaces without being accosted by paparazzi, but also just regular people. There was a movie called Funny People that wasn't particularly funny, starring Adam Sandler and I want to say Seth Rogen, and Eminem, the rapper, was in there at a party thrown by Adam Sandler, and Adam Sandler's kind of playing himself-ish in the movie. It's not really him, but it's basically him. He's having a party after he beat cancer, and Eminem said, "Why are we having this party if, now everything's going back to normal for you?" Because he's like, you name it, I can't go there. The grocery store, the market, wherever, it doesn't matter. Any place, Walmart, any place that you could go, Eminem can't go because he'll be accosted by lots of people. And that's not a very pleasant, unanxious life. Same thing with political figures and also with formal religion. If you're involved in formal religion, people are watching you, people are judging you, people are involved with your business. This is just the case. And if you get involved in the clergy or the hierarchy within churches, it's very political, and again, this makes your life more anxiety ridden and have more sort of things on your plate that can cause you pain and suffering or anguish. So it's just best to stay out of all of that stuff if you want to lead the happy, good life. It's more pleasant to just live unknown than it is to be engaged in politics. Believe me, as a person who helped form a union, being engaged with the politics utilized a lot of my time, made a lot of people aggravated, and made some enemies and some friends, but still, it's not the easy route. I had to spend a lot of my own personal time doing that at cost to myself, without getting paid and this, that, and the other. And even if you are getting paid, it's still, again, it causes a lot of disturbance in your life. So living unknown, they claim, is the right thing to do. Going back to Epicurus, his family got booted from his island, from the island that they were from. I want to say it was Samos, but I can't recall at the moment. But at any rate, his family, since his family was removed due to political stuff, it's actually important to remember that that's one of the things that he wants to have going on, is you not to have to befall the fate of being exiled due to your political beliefs. I mean, in Soviet Russia, you could be killed for your political beliefs. In our own country today, I said people might ridicule you or persecute you, but I mean, you know, your political beliefs in a lot of places might get you arrested or executed. So again, staying out of politics might make your life, again, common. Okay, so now let's get to the good stuff. So fear tends to be something that causes a lot of stress, anxiety, and pain to us, mental anguish and such. So there are three big things that we fear as human beings other than the unknown, which we shouldn't fear, according to Socrates also, or Plato, probably both, because it's, since you don't know what it is, you don't know if it's good or bad. So don't fear something that you're unsure of whether or not it's going to be good or bad. In fact, fear in general, according to the Epicureans, is a bad thing, because if you fear what you may suffer, you already suffer from what you fear. I'll say that again. If you fear what you may suffer, you already suffer from what you fear. That is to say that while bad things might happen to you, and that is certainly of concern and certainly could be painful, the fearing of it is additional pain and suffering that's unnecessary. Because if the thing happens, it's bad and painful and suffering, like, that's going to be that way, but there's no reason to have the anticipatory fear of it that's going to make the time before the bad thing happens worse. Or even worse, the bad thing not happening, and then you're just having a lot of pain, anxiety, and anguish as a result of fearing that thing that might occur, but maybe doesn't, right? In fact, just that fear of something bad happening can consume one's life and make it very disturbed and very troubled, and very anxiety prone and things like that. So they want you to live without fear. So let's talk about our three major factors of fear. Our fear factors, right? In the 90s, I used to have shirts and bumper stickers that said, "No fear." I'm dating myself, of course, here. But the gods. So they claim we fear the gods. Divine punishment, divine retribution. We must pray and sacrifice, or else God will be angry with us and perhaps punish us, or cast us down into hell with the flames on the lake of fire, or something along those lines. Or be reincarnated in a, you were a bad person, it's like, now we reincarnate you as an untouchable or a banana slug, something like that. Or, just any sort of thing, usually in religion, dealing with the gods. Bad things happen to you when you mess with the gods. And if you don't properly pray to the gods, or you upset the gods, bad things will happen. So he says that the gods are untroubled and cause no trouble. All right, why is this the case? So, what is our number one thing that we always try to attribute to God or gods? Perfection. Right? That's like our number one attribute for gods or God. That God is perfect, and generally speaking, also immortal or eternal or something along those lines. So the gods are untroubled. that is one of the qualities of perfection. If the gods could be disturbed, that would mean that they'd be unhappy, and that would make them less than perfect. If the gods wanted for anything, that would make them less than perfect. If the gods needed anything, that would make them less than perfect. If the gods were upset that you didn't pray or produce sacrifice for them, then that would mean they were troubled when you didn't pray or produce sacrifice, or that they were troubled when you did something wrong that they disagreed with, and therefore they'd be upset or mad at you, and that would be a form of being troubled, and that would not be perfect. So the gods couldn't possibly be upset with you because that would cause them trouble. And they cause no trouble because that doesn't seem befitting of a perfect being. A perfect being wouldn't be out there causing mischief or making trouble. That doesn't seem proper. Plato was very much on this wavelength as well. Why would the gods screw with you as human beings? So the idea here is that the gods are not going to fuck with you. The gods are not messing with you. The gods are not there to punish you or put you in your place, and they don't care about what you're up to because you can't hurt them. You can't harm them. You can't benefit them either, but they're there and you can't mess with them. So the gods are untroubled and cause no trouble. This one is again why science is important. Why? Well, because if I asked an ancient Greek why there are earthquakes and tidal waves, the answer to that question is, well, obviously Poseidon, the earth shaker, has caused a tidal wave or an earthquake, right? And we have angered him. So now we need to go sacrifice some bulls or exile somebody from the city or sacrifice a virgin or, some manner of something. Everybody's got to pray. We got to erect a temple. We got to put a statue back up, just random stuff. If we think that, we're offending the gods, then bad things will happen. Why do you think there was a plague this year and earthquakes and fires all over Australia and all this stuff? Oh my God, the gods must be angry at us for what's going on. And now we think, no, there's earthquakes with tectonic plates, there's hurricanes because of heat in the Caribbean and Atlantic during the summer. And then, Coriolis effects and things like that, although perhaps some of that is our fault based on global warming or something along those lines. But regardless, it's not entirely up to us that there are hurricanes. Those always will happen. The magnitude and multiplicity of them may be somewhat within our range, but probably based on how greenhouse gases are absorbed and the amount of time that it takes them to get to the atmosphere, even if we stopped right now, we're still pretty much in a bad spot when it comes to the global warming. It's not gonna, it's just going to get worse even if we were to stop today. Not to say we should just give up the ship or something like that, but save for us figuring out some way to get the greenhouse gases out of the air, perhaps with some more science, we're in trouble. Nonetheless, science should cause you less stress, because if you're not worried about offending the gods and you are just going to say, well, the earthquake they just happen, volcanoes just explode. Sure, it's because of pressure under the earth and then parts of the mantle or the core shooting up through cracks or crevices or whatever. But you don't make that happen. It's not Hephaestus being pissed off at you or something like that. There isn't a drought because the rain gods are not, happy with us or something like that. No, it's just weather patterns. It's just science. It's just stuff that's outside of your control. So therefore, you should be calm about it. Don't worry about the weather. You can't control it. It's not within your grasp or reach. And that's just in general the case. Even meteorologists, when they've got their fancy weather machines, still can't properly predict where hurricanes are going to go 100%. They got that spaghetti plot that goes all over the place, and then, it hits somewhere. It does something. Okay? So even there, where we do have some knowledge of this, it's not exactly like we're in control. Okay? So the gods are untroubled and cause no trouble due to their perfection. So they're not messing with you, so don't fear them. You just don't have to worry about that. This is one thing that you can just cross off your list of fears. The gods aren't there to screw with you. Okay, good. Next, death. Oh, the greatest of all evils. Everybody's afraid of death. Oh my God. What's going to happen when we die? Okay, so let's say somewhere around, oh, I don't know, it's probably like page 203-ish, I bet. I'm looking at a different edition than what you guys have. He says this, quote, um, accustom yourself to the belief that death is of no concern to us, since all good and evil lie in sensation, and sensation ends with death. Death, the most dreaded of evils, is therefore of no concern to us. For while we exist, death is not present, and when death is present, we no longer exist. It is therefore nothing either to the living or to the dead, since it is not present to the living, and the dead no longer are. So death is nothing to us. So say it, the Epicureans, because when you are alive, death is not present, and when death is present, you are not. And again, if you're a materialist, like they are, you think that when you die, that's just it. It's the end. You know, die and then rot, or worm food, or whatever, something like that. It's nothing to be worried about. I mean, Socrates. Again, we're close. So, you know, Socrates and I, we go way back. So, you know, Socrates even sort of mentioned this. The Stoics are going to mention this too. That, you know, Socrates would have been afraid of death if it was something to be feared, because he was so wise. But the idea here is something like, you know, if you die, there's no sensation, so there's no pleasure, so there's no pain, so it's just the end. And you know, you might fear that because you want to keep going, but in truth, it doesn't really matter, because you're dead. I mean, funerals are for the living, they're not for the dead. I mean, that's for other people to get their peace of mind. It's for other people to come together and say some stuff about the dead person, um, and keep their memory alive or something along those lines. But again, for the Epicureans, death is nothing to us. So don't worry about the gods. Don't worry about death. It's not going to hurt you, because once you're dead, you're done. And then, of course, but what about a painful, long, horrible, drawn-out death, or pain in general? Because, man, people fear pain a lot. Animals do too. That's why training works a lot of times, because it's done for pain or reward, pleasure. So at any rate, pain, Epicureans say, is either short-lived and intense, or dull and enduring. So let's break that down. You ever had a tooth get a cavity and you didn't get it fixed right away? Or you ever hurt your knees or your back, you know, in some sort of fashion? At first, the pain is really sharp, really present, and it's constantly bothering you, and it's something that just won't let up on you. But after a while, it just kind of fades into the background. That toothache just kind of, I mean, it doesn't go away entirely, but what it does do is it stops being quite so intense. The intensity of it goes away, and it becomes sort of dull and enduring. Epicurus was supposedly someone who suffered from and died of kidney stones. And they claim that kidney stones are the most painful thing that a man can possibly endure, and the closest thing that you can experience to childbirth. And I've known a woman who's experienced both childbirth and kidney stones, and she said, yeah, they're comparable, except for you get to show more for one of those things, and it can only happen about once a year. Kids. Um, Kidney stones, not so much. You can get those a couple of times a year or more than that, depending on what's going on with you. I personally do get kidney stones, and I want to tell you, it is the most painful thing I've ever experienced, and there is nothing that I can possibly compare it to. The first one that I had, I swear I thought I was being stabbed in the back and the knife was being twisted, because the real pain for kidney stones happens when the stone passes from the kidney to the bladder, not the actual peeing of it out. That's actually painful but more relieving than the passing from the kidney to the bladder. That just feels like the worst pain you've ever had, and it comes in waves and goes. Montaigne actually suffered from these as well. His father died from them, and on experience, he talks about the glory and pain of sort of like kidney stones and how crazy they are. But it's just one of those things that you get usually genetically. My dad gets them, but also I think it has something to do with our water sources. The largest concentration of people with kidney stones in the world are on the Gulf Coast of the Caribbean here, or the Gulf of Mexico, and the Yangtze River Valley in China. So I want to claim that there's probably something in the water that's also adding to the genetic proclivity towards this. I filter all of my water like twice, pretty much. Once from the sink and once in a filter that's in my refrigerator. And there's all sorts of other stuff you can do to try and avoid this. But I will say, the first time I had one, I thought I was dying because I didn't realize what was going on. And the pain was so great that I vomited in the ER waiting room while I was waiting from the pain. And I was in such pain that when my fiance came into the room to try and hold my hand, she had to leave the room because of how contorted my face looked, because she thought she was going to faint. And then they gave me morphine, which I was saddened by because I'd never had morphine, and it didn't really do very much for me at that point. And I was like, oh. And then they gave me fentanyl, which is 100 times stronger and also in the same group as like heroin or something like that. It's stronger than that even, actually. And that still didn't entirely take the pain away, but it made me feel better. I understand why people do those sorts of drugs, because it felt good. But I also understand why you shouldn't do those drugs, because it's really being dangerous, bad, and addictive for you. So don't do those drugs. But like when people are like, I don't know why people do that, I'm like, well, I totally know why. I also totally know why you shouldn't. But at any rate, also being, in a hospital, getting it from a clean intravenous, sort of method is a lot better than shooting up or something like that anyways. And having people who are, trained professionals giving it to you, it's a little different. But at any rate, so the pain is short-lived and intense. So anytime I'm feeling the kidney pain, I just kind of try to ignore it because I know it'll pass eventually. It'll be really intense for a little while and then it'll go away. And I'll tell you this, after having passed a few stones, actually a lot at this point, the first one was the most painful, but after a while, they're horrible. They really are still. And also, depending on size, they can be much worse or much better. Better being a relative term here. But the idea is that I've grown accustomed to what that pain is like, and therefore it's less weird for me, and I can act a little bit more normal than the average bear, and especially more normal than I did the first time I had them. I remember I had to go meet up with some family in Bradenton at one point while I was passing one. I was like sweating and shaking a little bit and, gritting my teeth, and people were like, are you okay? I'm like, passing a kidney stone, but I'm here because the family doesn't get together that frequently, and I want to make sure that I'm here and see the kids and all that stuff. I didn't hang out for too long. I had the meal, we talked and such, and then I went home. But at any rate, getting back to this, I also suffer from knee and back joint pains due to the fact that I ran a lot of cross country when I was younger. You might not think it now, but at one point I was much skinnier and I ran a lot. That is not good for you, by the way. Running a lot in long distances beats up your knees and your back, and those things are not very easily replaceable and not well. So at any rate, my point here is that I just have constant knee and back pain. That's just always there. I just don't notice it most of the time. In fact, every time I do get pain medication when I'm passing the kidney stone, the very first thing that I notice is that my knees and my back feel without pain. And that's an odd feeling. The lack of the pain is noticeable as opposed to it just being there in the background constantly. And this is another thing that the Epicureans like to focus on, is that it's an absence of pain and an absence of anxiety that we're shooting for as our greatest pleasures, not just trying to eat a whole bunch of food and have a bunch of sex and have a lot of merriment or things like that. It's more along the lines of not having pain and being tranquil than it is about enjoying all of the normal sort of, what we would think of as bodily, worldly pleasures or something like that. Okay. So, the dull and enduring part is also, that's sort of like your sort of like, well, it's either going to be intense for a little while or it's going to dull out, because the humans are extremely good at suffering. It's probably one of our strongest traits as human beings. We live on all 7 continents. Nothing else does that. It's ridiculous. Why would we live on all of them? I mean, even Antarctica, we've got scientists and people down there, and man, that is a blasted wasteland. I mean, the Inuits of northern Alaska and Canada, I don't understand how people live there. Well, I do, but I mean, and sub-Saharan Africa and things like that. I mean, it's just, we can live almost anywhere, and at the cost of great suffering, and we do as human beings. We adapt and we suffer, and we're built for it, and we're built to, basically get used to it. So, at any rate, what kind of pleasure? Getting back to what I had said earlier, let us look at our book once again on page 204 for you, anyways. And they say this: when we say that pleasure is the end, we do not mean the pleasure of the profligate or that which depends on physical enjoyment. So what's a profligate? Did anyone look this up when they were reading? Probably not, even though you could easily have just typed it in on your computer or did it on your phone or whatever. Or I guess you guys use your thumbs, I don't know. So what do we mean by profligate? Okay, well, a profligate is somebody who enjoys prodigal pleasures, wasteful pleasures, licentiousness, debauchery, and such things like that. The story of the prodigal son, if you know that one from the Bible, is about the son who goes off and does all of those sorts of things and then comes home and they kill the fatted calf for him, even though his other brother had been being a good person his whole life and they didn't kill the fatted calf for him. So goes the story anyways. But at any rate, so we carry on. It's not that which depends on physical enjoyment, but by pleasure we mean a state where the body is free from pain and the mind from anxiety. Free from anxiety. Neither continual drinking and dancing, nor sexual love, nor enjoyment of fish and whatever else the luxurious table offers brings about the pleasant life. Rather, it is produced by reason, which is sober, which examines the motive for every choice and rejection, and which drives away all those opinions through which the great tumult lays hold of the mind. Again, it's not to say you can't drink or you can't have sex, you can't do any of these things. Those things are also good, but those shouldn't be your focus. In fact, this is one of the things that's important, is what we sometimes refer to as the paradox of pleasure. If you want fancy, nice things like the best clothing and then you need fish, he says, because fish is expensive. It's still expensive today. I only get to eat fish sometimes. I mean, like, if I'm being cheap, I get tilapia, but that's still more expensive than me getting ground beef or chicken most of the time. But like good fish is very expensive, generally speaking, and so is good meat, and such things, and interesting spices like saffron. It's worth more than its weight in gold. It's very good, though, and whatnot. I mean, actually, we live in a day and age where you can get pretty much any seasoning you want for a reasonable price. I mean, they are a little expensive, but kings didn't have spice cabinets as good as mine. Back in the day, entire wars were fought over seasoning and spices. Spice trade in India, particularly, was ridiculous, in the Caribbean. But you know, I can get my Badia brand, which is the cheap brand if you on the Spanish noodle, usually the Hispanic aisle. But you know, again, it's a little lower quality, but you still get saffron for cheaper than usual, and bay leaves and everything else that you probably need. Any rate, point being here is that you shouldn't seek luxury or you will be disappointed, right? If you want all the nice, fancy, luxurious things, well, what happens when you don't get them? You're upset, you're disappointed, you're saddened or angry, right? I should have got it. Should have been my promotion. I should have had this, that, or the other. And then you're upset about it. So if you set your bar low for wanting pleasure, then it will be met or exceeded. A small cup is easier to fill, if you will. However, they do also point out that it makes luxury or awesome stuff better. I know people that are pretty rich and they eat really good food all the time, so they're kind of bored by it. I mean, it's not a big deal. I have people that I know that have cattle in Mississippi, and they're not really that stoked about steaks or that stoked about beef. My grandparents own a farm in Panama, and when they come to the U.S., they never really want to eat chicken or eggs because they have lots of chickens and lots of eggs. I love chicken and eggs, but they never want to eat that because they eat that all the time where they're at. So they prefer the beef or the fish or something like that. That's a little bit more sort of readily available here over the thing that they have all the time. The Pilgrims actually hated lobster because it was really easy to catch. There were tons of them. They used to feed it to prisoners because it was considered so terrible of a food or something like that. I mean, you know, now lobster is like great, but it's just sort of like anything that you get consistently over and over again becomes boring to you. And then it's like steak again, or, you know, if you've ever eaten any food, even food that you like continuously over and over again, it gets boring. You know, same thing with lots of stuff. You get bored of it and then you want more. Desire desires desire. One of my favorite sentences in the English language, and it's true. It's a nice little truism, and it's grammatically correct as well. So he says this is also on the same page, natural wealth is limited and easily obtained. The wealth defined by vain fancies is always beyond reach, or it can be. Nothing satisfies him to whom what is enough is little. So if you think very little of what is enough to survive, then nothing will satisfy you. You want more and more. I'm pretty satisfied with very little. I mean, I like having good food, but food in general is all that I need. A roof over my head, kibble for my dogs, my significant other, and, you know, enough money to keep me clothed or something like that. I guess I like hats. But at any rate, this is not a necessity. I could go without, but I don't know why. So finally, he says this. To be accustomed to simple and plain living is conducive to health and makes man ready for the necessary tasks of life. It also makes us more ready for the enjoyment of luxury if at intervals we chance to meet with it, and it renders us fearless against fortune. So if you have a lot of money or you got a lot of stuff, they also claim that you're afraid of losing it, that you have a fear of losing what you have, whether that's political power, property, or just money, or anything else like that, that there's a certain level of fear of losing all of that, which could happen in a revolution, getting robbed, or, you know, the economy tanking or something like that. You know, fortune can ruin, or fate can ruin your, basically your possessions or your monetary holdings or whatever you want to call it. But they also claim that if you want very little, when luxury comes your way, when you get to eat at the luxurious table, when you have the fish or the steak or whatever, it's that much better for you than everybody else who gets it normally, right? As Kant says, which is a famous saying, not just from him, hunger is the best sauce, right? Or water is sweet when we're really thirsty, or something along those lines. But if you don't seek pleasure, then when pleasure comes to you, it's the best. But if you do seek pleasure, you're going to be disappointed and not get as much of it as you want. And again, this is what they call the paradox of pleasure. If you seek it out, you don't get it. If you don't seek it out, then you get it. Any rate, take luxury when it comes your way. I absolutely want to say this. We live in Tampa, or at least I do. The HCC board is in Tampa. And there's a restaurant called Burns. It's pretty much the best steakhouse in the country. They have the second or first largest wine cellar in the country, or something like that. You can't get out of that place for less than $200 probably. And one summer, me and my fiance, instead of going on a staycation to St. Pete and renting a hotel there and just going out on the beach or whatever, because that's sort of like the thing you do sometimes. Instead of taking a vacation, we decided that we were going to eat at Burns, because we've been in Tampa so long now. We should at least go out one night to that restaurant and eat their, dry aged steak, which is delicious. I mean, it was the best steak I've ever had. It was wonderful. And then we went up to the dessert room, and that was wonderful. You had the best bananas foster I've ever had. And a really nice bottle of wine, a Brunello from Italy. Brunellos are just delicious, wonderful wines. They're really expensive because of their rarity, but also because of their deliciousness. And unlike a lot of wines, which don't really get better with age, Brunellos do get better with age. Oh, they get silky and smooth. And at any rate, so carrying on, that was wonderful. Now, if I did that every day, I probably wouldn't care about it so much, and I wouldn't speak so fondly of it like I am right now. But since I have it occasionally, well, once, but since I've had it occasionally, that's good. It's also sort of like, your college students, if you've been in college other than our current era where we're all cloistered at home from the coronavirus, if somebody's parents come into town and they take everybody out to dinner, woo, I'm taking the free meal. I take free meals anytime people offer them. In fact, when I was in college at Emory, which is a pretty rich school, there was a group on our, social media service that we had at the time for the university. It was called LearnLink or something like that. I don't know. It would have been like Canvas, and it was a Canvas group, let's call it, for the sake of simplicity here. It was called Free Food, and they would just post where there was free food on campus, because there was like a group of people that if they knew where there was free food, they would post it there. And oh man, I love Ramadan the most. I mean, I'm not Islamic, but they did provide a huge amount of food for Ramadan, which is fasting during the daylight hours, and then once the sun goes down, you can eat a whole bunch. So what would happen is you fast during the day, nothing besides or even water maybe, is supposed to pass one's lips during the daylight hours, and then once that passes, then they usually have like a feast basically. And man, they had some really good food after that, because it's sort of like a holiday in a certain sense, because it's a very important religious holiday that's like a month long, and there's just food constantly being served after sundown because everybody hasn't eaten all day, and it's great. Actually, again, hunger is the best sauce or something like that. But I just love going around and getting free food everywhere that there was on campus, because I never pass up a free meal. In fact, even the union, when they're trying to get people to show up for numbers or whatever, they usually have a lot of meetings at bars, which is actually traditional in a lot of ways for unions. Beer hall pushts and things like that or whatever. They'll give you a coupon for a free beer. The first beer is on them. A lot of times at union meetings that happen at bars or whatever, to entice you to come. A little free luxury or something like that. Again, as somebody who teaches as an adjunct, I make very little money to do this, and I live mostly pretty simply. So, that being the case, I like luxury when it comes my way. This tie, my parents bought for me. This shirt, I got from the thrift store. This vest, I got on super sale with a number of other vests. Actually, all the vests I own together. My fiance bought me this hat. I have another one that my father bought me. I accept the luxury when it comes my way. And, I have a friend who happens to be a millionaire, and though I absolutely always try to pay for things, she never lets me pay for things. And I accept that. She has money, I do not. And though I don't want to exploit her or use her, if she offers to pay for a meal or the booze that we're having or whatever it may be, I accept, because she has huge amounts of money. And as a result, she can do this job and not worry about the money. And actually, I remember she moved to the West Coast because she got an adjunct job at a university in Portland. And I asked her how much it paid, and she said, "Oh, I don't know, but they're going to let me make my own classes. and they're going to let me be in charge of the philosophy department, which doesn't have a full-time faculty member, but they're going to let me do it. And I was like, what are they paying for that? She was like, oh, I don't care, because she just doesn't care. I know another millionaire who I'm not particularly friends with. He's a professor at USF. And I was literally nearby him at one point when Bank of America called him and told him there was $1 million difference in one of his accounts. And he seemed very undisturbed by this because he has a shit ton of money and a chateau in the south of France and all this other stuff. Why does he work? Why does he do philosophy? Well, because he still finds this to be the good life. This is still the life that he would consider to be the best. So again, it's not necessarily all about money or luxury or any of that. And furthermore, to wrap this all up, friendship, so saith Epicurus, is the best of all possible pleasures. And that's an interesting thing to say. Aristotle mostly agrees. He says it's the best external good. Um, but also, the Epicureans were famed for living in small communes. They'd have like large, sort of like compounds that the richest amongst them would pay for and fund and foot the bill, and they would take anybody in that wanted to be an Epicurean. And they would live within inside the walls of the commune, and they'd farm and they'd do their own little thing, and they'd stay out of politics, and they'd stay out of the formal religious stuff, they'd stay away from all the turmoil and tumult of the outside world, and they'd just kind of talk about philosophy and try to learn some science and, you know, do stuff like that so that they could learn and live without fear and, you know, not worry about the gods and going to church every Sunday you're going to go to hell, or repenting or whatever, or sacrifice and prayer, and not worry about dying because it's not a big deal, because again, when you're dead, you're just dead. You can't, it's not going to hurt you anymore. And pain, again, is ephemeral. It is either, you know, short-lived and intense, or it's dull and enduring. When we look at perhaps the book Paradise Lost by John Milton, one of the last epics written, this is a story of mostly starring Satan, where he is cast out of heaven by God because he is jealous of God's love for mankind, and he goes against God, and he casts Lucifer or Satan down onto the lake of fire, and he chains him to a rock on the burning lake of fire. And he's down there suffering on fire and burning for a long time, but then eventually the shackles are released and he's allowed to leave. And then he raises an army and comes once again against God with an army of demons and devils, and fights God, and of course loses to God because you can't beat God. So a lot of people ask, well, why did God unchain him from the rock in the lake of fire? Was this a mercy? Was this merciful? Was this supposed to be like, all right, Satan, let's see if you can do better? No, no, this is not a mercy. What this is, well, you can only be down there burning on the rock on the lake of fire so long before it's just like, all right, still burning, still on fire, still painful, dull and enduring. Gotta have some more spice of life with that torture. So he allows Satan to think that he might be able to overcome God and overthrow heaven. Better to rule in hell than to be a slave in heaven, I think is one of the famous lines from Satan in that book. And the deal is that God gives him the ability to fail once again, and fail monumentally, and feel bad and have additional suffering of a different kind that's not just a physical burning. And I'll tell you, mental anguish is generally speaking more painful than physical anguish. I mean, if you've ever had a broken heart or lost somebody very close to you, or, you know, something along those lines, those things tend to feel more painful and enduring than the actual pain, or having been molested or raped or something along those lines. The pain of the memory of that is more than the actual pain of the beating or the raping or the molestation that actually happened. That pain goes away, the physical stuff. If it was painful at all, I mean, it might just be confusing and felt exploitive or bad or wrong, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it was painful in a physical sort of way, but certainly in a mental sort of way it would have been. However, the point here is that the mental anguish, the anxiety, the disturbedness that happens there, that's what's really painful in a certain sense, and it's enduring and long lasting. But if we, you know, it can become dull and enduring and in the background instead of constantly being so intense. Like when the event happens initially, the trauma happens, the person dies, the assault takes place, you know, things of that nature or manner. whatever is going to cause you your PTSD or something like that. Because eventually it just kind of fades into the background, it fades into your mind, and hopefully you can forget about it or not think about it as much. The wound which never heals is that which we always remember. Right? Later in the course, Nietzsche will claim that the root of all memory is pain. But at any rate, friendship's the best pleasure. It's the most enduring if you make it that way, and it's at less cost and things like that. So they're really big on friendship and coming together and sharing stuff communally and living together the good life, free from fear and anxiety and pain. And um, this is ataraxia. All right, now we're going to talk about the Stoics. So have a good day, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Live the good life of pleasure and rational